By the early 1950s, Studebaker was having significant financial difficulties. And in 1954, Studebaker and Packard merged together to found the Studebaker-Packard Corporation. It was really an interesting merger in that neither party really brought all that much to the table, at least financially. It's kind of like two broke individuals getting wed together. It's just destined for trouble. And that's unfortunately what happened to Studebaker shortly after the merger with Packard. However, there were a lot of Studebakers that came out in the 1950s as well as into the 1960s that really did set some interesting styling trends. Of course, there is the beautiful 1953 Studebaker Starliner coupe that really kind of helped transition the auto industry from these cars that were relatively tall and narrow to the longer, lower, wider theme. In fact, the Studebaker coupes for 1953 rode atop a longer wheelbase than the sedans, if you can believe that. And that was to give them that better, graceful, longer, lower, wider proportion. Of course, they had the very low cowls up front, the very low hood line, so low, in fact, that Studebaker engineers had to redesign the air cleaner assembly so that the hood could clear the underhood area and various componentry. And even out back, the bumpers, which unfortunately the designers wanted to be one piece all the way around, and they had to be split into multiple pieces. But that entire rear end and the styling of the car overall just set new trends in 1953. Now, another car set some trends for Studebaker, and that was the 1962 Avanti. The Avanti was designed, like the 1953, by Raymond Loewy and Associates, and it again had a number of seminal styling features. Probably most prominently the so-called Coke bottle styling, and you can see that on the Avanti as the sheet metal kind of goes and kicks upward near that rear quarter window and also kicks outboard and flares at the rear wheel. That was something that many car companies would emulate going forward on cars like the mid-60s General Motors lineup and even Ford vehicles into the early 1970s. But that car was designed, as I mentioned, by Raymond Loewy, and the chief of Studebaker design during this time frame was Brook Stevens. And Brook Stevens kind of bristled at the fact that the Avanti was not designed under his leadership and wanted to show the Studebaker designers, and particularly he could, design something that would take Studebaker into the future. Now, before we talk more about the Scepter, you have to understand what was really all the rage at the time in the marketplace. And that comes down to an interesting introduction in 1958, that of the four-place Thunderbird. Remember, from 1955 to 1957, the Ford Thunderbird was a two-place car, kind of a sportier car, not a sports car, but a sportier car, that to some degree competed with the Chevrolet Corvette, but it only held two passengers. Now, by 1958, one of the geniuses of Ford product planning was turning that two-place Thunderbird into a four-place personal luxury coupe. And that Thunderbird really set off the personal luxury coupe craze that would continue on, I would say, into the early 1970s, maybe even the mid-1970s. I guess you could say that, particularly with the Lincoln Mark IV and Lincoln Mark V having significant success. Maybe I'd even date the end of the personal luxury craze in the late 70s. In any case, that four-place Thunderbird that came out in 1958 would help spur on cars like the 1963 Riviera from General Motors. And you could arguably even say a car like the 1969 Grand Prix or the 1970 Monte Carlo. Those personal luxury coupes were also something that came out of the 1958 Thunderbird and that personal luxury coupe genre. So when Brook Stevens thought, well, I want to prove that I can do something that's even better than Raymond Loewy, what did he turn to? Creating a beautiful personal luxury coupe, and that is this 1962/1963 Studebaker Scepter. Now, as I mentioned, the Scepter was designed from the get-go to be a personal luxury coupe, and that was because of the popularity of that particular type of vehicle at this time. But notice how many cool and interesting forms this Scepter really has, and graphics as well. Like the front end graphics. Take a look at the headlamps that are kind of wall-to-wall headlamps underneath the electric razor style grille there. That was a very popular kind of early 60s styling cue that a number of cars had, including the 1961 Oldsmobile F85 also had a electric razor-like grille. But here Stevens has kind of integrated it and put it atop that wall-to-wall headlamp that you see beneath it. You also have these kind of air intakes that sit above the electric razor grille. And notice there's no hood ornament here and no badging on the front of the car. Instead, the badge, the new Studebaker style badge, is placed on the hood, and we'll see that repeated in a number of forms, including on the steering wheel. Some would call that logo the so-called polo mallet for obvious reasons that we'll see in a second. But up front, as I mentioned, you have that electric razor-like, grill insert, if you will. And one of the things that helps with, as well as the wall-to-wall headlamps, is accentuating the width of the vehicle. And of course, remember, Studebaker was the company that really helped pioneer that lower, longer, wider look with the 1953 vehicles. So Brooks Stevens was continuing kind of that philosophy here in a more novel form. You'll also notice that the Scepter has very thin A-pillars as well as an extremely thin roof. It almost looks like the roof is floating, as we'll see from the side, because the C-pillar is also unique and somewhat translucent. Let's shift now to the side view, and you notice just how thin that roof is. It's obviously a hardtop coupe, but it's kind of a semi-floating roof as well, with those toothpicky A-pillars and then the translucent C-pillar. I thought that was an interesting approach. The C-pillar is rather thick. It is, I would say, canted forward clearly quite a bit, but it is translucent, so it gives that roof even, I would say, a more airy look to it. Now, aside from that, you have this kind of tubular body side section with this middle kind of lighter colored strip that hits the car right at the waistline. And that serves to slim it, I think, a little bit when you take a look at it from the side. If you didn't have that, it would look like there's quite a bit of sheet metal from the rockers up to the belt line. And that helps kind of visually divide it and take your eye off of what could otherwise be a potentially a little bit chunky kind of a form. And as we rotate around to the rear three-quarter view of the vehicle, you'll notice that just like the front with the wall-to-wall headlamps, out back you have a wall-to-wall tail lamp with the block lettering saying Studebaker in the middle there. You know, does that kind of look 1965 Dodge Charger-esque to you? I think that there's a lot of cars, including later Thunderbirds, that would really draw upon this wall-to-wall tail lamp theme, again, helping accentuate the width. And what I love about this car is there's just a completely unbroken surface from the top of the quarter panel all the way from one side to the other. It's not like the quarter panel has a peak and then it dips down and then you have the deck lid. This is really just one continuous plane, and that again helps accentuate the width, because you can imagine if the quarter were raised relative to the deck lid, then it would appear that the car wasn't quite as wide as what it really is. Here, everything is done to just help accentuate that width. And the backlight is also a tremendously large backlight. So you have this very open and airy style cabin, certainly very different from Studebaker's of a few years prior. And here we have the Scepter in the flesh at the Eyes on Design car show in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. Notice the Packard Predictor also over there. You can see the Polo Mallet logo on the hood kind of embossed and pushed up from underneath. And as I rotate around here to the front, see how wide this looks once you're taking a look at it, because your eye really sees the full width of that electric razor-like grille and the wall-to-wall headlamps. Now notice those air intakes. They kind of help with the dog bone style or barbell style front end, where the outer portion is flared a little bit compared to the midsection. But just like the back, you'll notice that there's no real top of the fender here. It's just a continuous form with the top of that air intake. Again, helping provide this appearance of width to the vehicle. Now, as we rotate around to this side, you'll also notice there's not that big argent silver strip, and the wheel covers are different. That's because there's two different kind of trim and wheel cover proposals on this car, one on either side, so that designers could get a sense for what would look better. And there's that Polo Mallet logo again. Here you can see the argent silver strip that's thicker and different wheel covers on this side. I think I kind of like this one better, but with the wheel covers from the passenger side. These wheel covers aren't necessarily my favorite. And it looks like this car even has cornering lamps, which, by the way, will be introduced in 1962 on Cadillacs for the first time. This car was produced at a cost of $16,000 as a prototype, about the equivalent of $140,000 today in Italy, and all hand-built. And look at that beautiful roofline and sail panel that you can see there. Just this very light roof that has a slight arc to it, kind of dips down as it heads rearward. And here you can see up close that translucent C-pillar. I haven't seen a car before or since with that translucent C-pillar. Now inside you have that polo mallet wheel, and by the way, doesn't that look like a Chrysler wheel from later years, maybe? And complete with the interior look. We'll look more at that in a second. But take a look again at how beautiful just this arcing roof line is that transitions into the backlight seamlessly. And now here we are coming around to the rear of the car where you see that Polo Mallet logo again and this wall-to-wall tail lamp. And I love how the car just has this slight taper. It gets a little bit tapered as it goes rearward. But everything on this, the detailing is fantastic. These very thin, delicate moldings that are outlining that wall-to-wall tail lamp. There's some bright work that outlines it that's very delicate. Not much chrome on this car really at all. The bumpers and then some little detail pieces, but the bright work is relatively minimal. Of course, you have the beltline molding and the trim around the C-pillar and the trim around the daylight opening in general in the backlight. But again, relatively devoid of chrome on the body side. I also love how the rear window kind of wraps around slightly to the sides, and it just has this look of a little bit of a bubble kind of look. And we're going to look a little bit more at the tail lamp here and the wall-to-wall nature of that and those little strakes that flank the license plate that says Scepter. It's a shame the Studebaker couldn't have made this. I don't think it would have helped them survive, but it would have been a great-looking car. It's a shame that this is only a one-off. Now take a look here at the speedometer as well as the gauges in these floating pods. I think the interior is almost as cool as the exterior. The center console is canted toward the driver. Again, I think Chrysler took a lot of inspiration from this car and that Polo Mallet logo that would appear in steering wheels, would appear in logos, etc. For them on a number of cars. Here you can see these floating dials for the interior gauges. So what do you think of the Scepter and the cool Polo Mallet logo? It's hard to say who, I guess, came out with that style of logo first. Dodge had its, I think, Fratzog, as some people call it, that came out in the 1962 Dodge Polara. And as I mentioned, this Scepter was being designed in 1962, and its build was completed in 1963. Not quite sure which one came first or what the inspiration was. Sometimes it's just coincidence that designers come up with things that look rather similar. But regardless, I think that it looks great on the Studebaker, and I love how they repeated it in the interior with the steering wheel and other little bits of trim, including the logo being embedded in the seats. So I don't think, as I mentioned, that this car would have helped save Studebaker. It was too far gone by this point in time, and it really was, let's say, a last-ditch effort by Brook to produce something that he thought was a compelling design, really in the wake of the Avanti that left him smarting. But he also recognized that the personal luxury coupe class was not going to be the high-volume vehicles that Studebaker needed to return to profitability. And so he did some other similarly cool concepts during this time frame, but we're going to save those for another day and talk about them in greater detail at that point, because that deserves a completely new video. Put a comment in the comment section. Be sure to do that. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks again for watching.